When Mikal Bridges traded to the New York Knicks this offseason, he reunites with his former college teammates in Jalen Brunson, Josh Hart, and Donte DiVincenzo, completing the Nova Knicks squad that we all anticipated would happen eventually. What I imagine is an NBA record for college teammates on the same NBA squad at once. I wanted to go back and see which other college teammates in recent NBA history became teammates in the pros. It doesn't happen super often, but probably more than you think, like most famously and arguably the best college teammate duo who ended up teammates as pros. Hakeem Olajuwon and Clyde Drexler went from teammates at the University of Houston in the 80s to winning a championship with the Rockets in 95. My name is Caleb, and today we're going to go through a few groups of players since 2010 who became teammates in the league after playing together in college. This isn't in any order, but mostly a combination of players that I thought of when I got the idea for this, players who have had notable NBA careers, and how their time as teammates were spent in the league. With that being said, let's jump in. In the intro, I mentioned that 4 college teammates on an NBA team is probably a record, and that record was probably already set last season with this very team. While the average fan knew of Brunson, Hart, and DiVincenzo being college teammates, it's easy to forget that the man who assisted the game-winning shot that won them the championship in 2016, and one of the most iconic plays in NCAA history, was also on the roster. Ryan Arcidiacono was a Knick for the first half of the season, making the Villanova Wildcat total on the 2024 New York Knicks round up to 4. What makes this combo even more interesting is that in the first stint with the Knicks in 2022-23, he was involved in the trade that brought Josh Hart to the Knicks and sent him to the Blazers. He was waived after 9 games in Portland, and he rejoined the Knicks in the 2023 offseason, reuniting with Brunson and joined by Hart and DiVincenzo, forming what could be considered the original Nova Knicks. If you paid any attention to Big Ten basketball in the late 2000s and early 2010s, you know that the Purdue Boilermakers were one of the best teams in the country. Coached by Matt Painter and led by their big three of Robbie Hummel, Juwan Johnson, and E'Twaun Moore, they consistently be a threat to take the Big Ten every year. And while a handful of disappointing March Madness finishes would dampen their reputation a bit, it was very clear that this squad had NBA players on the roster. And in the 2011 NBA draft, both Juwan Johnson and E'Twaun Moore would be selected by the Boston Celtics, Johnson going 27th and Moore going 55th, taking them from college kids in West Lafayette to NBA rookies in Boston. During their rookie year, they wouldn't see much playing time on a team that finished 4th in the East and made a run to the Eastern Conference Finals in what would be the last season of the Big Three Celtics. They'd see limited action in 30-plus games and were both traded to Houston during the 2012 offseason, where they were both shortly waived afterward. Johnson's career would continue overseas as he hasn't played in the NBA since, but Moore would be picked up by Orlando, and with more playing time and opportunity would carve out a solid decade-long career as a role player for the Magic, Bulls, Pelicans, and Suns, with whom he'd reach the 2021 NBA Finals with. Speaking of early 2010s Big Ten basketball, the Indiana Hoosiers would see a couple years of resurgence led by the duo of Cody Zeller and Victor Oladipo. The legendary basketball program had an at-best average tenure the decade before and didn't look too great in Coach Tom Crean's first few seasons as head coach. But come the 2012 season, they become one of the best teams in the country, with Zeller and Oladipo arguably being the best duo. After 2 seasons as teammates and a couple of Sweet 16 runs, the two would declare for the 2013 NBA draft. And what was one of the overall weaker draft classes in recent memory, both Zeller and Oladipo were projected lottery picks, with Oladipo a legit contender to go number 1 to Cleveland. But as you probably know, the Cavs shocked the world with Anthony Bennett, landing Oladipo in Orlando to play for the Magic, and his college running mate would go 2 picks later to the Bobcats. Victor Oladipo, after an average start to his career, would take off with the Pacers in year 5, becoming an All-NBA player, All-Star, and All-League defender, and Indiana's latest franchise player post Paul George. He'd have another All-Star season before injuries became a recurring theme for his career, and after turning down an extension from the Pacers in 2020, he'd be traded to Houston, where he'd play just 20 games before being traded again to his preferred destination, the Miami Heat. Cody Zeller never quite lived up to the expectations as the number 4 pick, but was a mainstay on average to below average Charlotte teams, putting up just under 9 points and 6 rebounds in 8 seasons with the Hornets franchise. Fast forward to 2023, and Zeller would sign mid-season with the Miami Heat and reunite with his former Hoosier teammate Victor Oladipo, where the two would be rotational pieces on the Eastern Conference's 8th seed. And while Oladipo would suffer torn patellar tendon during the first round of the playoffs versus Milwaukee, the Heat would go on to be the second 8th seed to ever reach the finals, where they'd lose to the Nuggets in 5. A decade earlier, Zeller and Oladipo were dominating college basketball. While their NBA careers are probably reaching their twilight, there's no denying that the two put Bloomington back into the college basketball spotlight. By now in this video, you can probably tell I grew up watching a lot of Big Ten basketball, and the fact that this list has started the way it has is completely coincidental, but the amount of NBA talent on Big Ten rosters back in the day was pretty insane. As a 4 seed in the 2013 NCAA tournament, the Michigan Wolverines would reach the national championship game before falling to Louisville, a roster that included arguably the best backcourt in the country, Tim Hardaway Jr. and Trey Burke dominated in 2013, and Burke had an all-time tournament run and solidified himself as a lottery pick. He and Hardaway would both declare for the 2013 NBA draft, where they'd be selected 9th overall by the Jazz and 24th overall by the Knicks, respectively. Burke's best season was his rookie year, where he averaged just under 12 a game, 6 assists and 3 boards, but inconsistent efficiency and defense didn't really help his case, so after being benched in year 3, he'd be traded to Washington, where he spent a season, and ended up in New York in 2017. While Hardaway Jr. hasn't had the Hall of Fame career like his father, he's been an on and off again starter for a decade plus, averaging around 14 a game for 12 seasons on 41% shooting. After his first stint with the Knicks, he spent 2 years in Atlanta before returning to New York in 2017, reuniting the former Wolverine backcourt on an NBA roster. Burke spent a decent amount of time on the Westchester Knicks in the G League his first season there, but he and Hardaway would spend the next season and a half as Knicks before being dealt to Dallas in the trade that sent them along with Kristaps Porzingis to the Mavs. After finishing the 2019 season in Dallas, Burke would sign with the Sixers in the first half of the 2020 season before rejoining Dallas for the NBA bubble, reuniting with Hardaway once again. They played 2 more full seasons together before Burke was traded during the 2022 offseason, and Hardaway Jr. would be a Mav until he'd be traded to the Pistons for Quentin Grimes in 2024, bringing him back to Michigan, where he and Trey Burke at one point had the state on lock. After an amazing regular season, the 2010 Butler Bulldogs made an unforgettable run to the national championship game before Gordon Hayward almost sank what would have been the most iconic game winner in tournament history.
Launches the shot. Oh, it almost went in!
Hayward played himself into a projected lottery pick, and with the 9th pick in the 2010 NBA draft, the Utah Jazz would make that a reality. The following year, Butler would return most of his roster, including Shelvin Mack, who would take over as the team's best player, where they'd again make another miraculous run to the championship game before falling to UConn. Mack would enter the 2011 draft and be selected by the Wizards as the 4th pick in the 2nd round, making he and Hayward the first Butler Bulldogs to make the NBA in modern league history. Gordon Hayward would begin his career as a rotational piece off the bench, but as Utah would move off of Darren Williams, Paul Millsap, and Al Jefferson, Hayward would see more of an opportunity as the focal point in Utah's offense in 2013 and become their franchise player. Over the next few seasons, he'd become one of the better all-around players in the league, making his first All-Star team in 2017 after averaging 22, 5, and 3. Mack, on the other hand, would see very few minutes in his first handful of seasons with the Wizards and Sixers, but would find some stability with the Hawks, most notably as the backup point guard on the 2015 Eastern Conference Finals team that infamously posted the best record in the conference that year and sent 4 players to the All-Star game. In February 2016, he'd be traded to the Utah Jazz, making him teammates once again with his fellow Butler Bulldog, Gordon Hayward. Hayward and Mack would spend a season and a half together as teammates, with this time frame being the best of their respective careers. As mentioned before, Hayward would make the All-Star team in 2017, and Mack would post career highs in every statistical category. Mack and Hayward are probably some of the more notable mid-major teammates in recent NBA history, and their time at Butler is one that is held in high regard in college basketball history. The 2019 Duke Blue Devils were one of the most exciting college basketball teams to watch in recent memory, and the Zion Williamson, RJ Barrett, and Cam Reddish team-up was one of the most anticipated. All expected to be one and done, Zion's services were the prize in 2019, as he would end up going first to the Pelicans, leaving the Knicks to pick up RJ Barrett at 3, and Cam Reddish going 10th to Atlanta. But out of his former Duke teammates, Barrett was the one that started off his rookie campaign strong, and ended the season averaging 14, 5, and 2, while Williamson was injured until January and would try to make a late Rookie of the Year push, and Reddish wasn't seeing much opportunity in Atlanta. Barrett would continue to become an integral part of the improving Knicks. Reddish would look for opportunity elsewhere, and he'd be traded to the New York Knicks midway through the 2022 season, where 2/3 of Duke's Big Three would reassemble. Fortune hasn't been very kind to the Knicks until recently, so the odds of tanking for Zion just to end up with his 2 college teammates is kind of funny. But RJ would continue to be solid for the Knicks before getting traded to the Raptors in late 2023, and Cam Reddish would once again find himself without an established role with the Knicks and would subsequently be traded to Portland in February 2023. We all know Kemba Walker is a college basketball legend. As soon as he hit his iconic buzzer beater in the 2011 Big East tournament, you knew he was in for an all-time March Madness run. Kemba would lead the UConn Huskies to the 2011 National Championship, where they'd end the back-to-back Cinderella Butler Bulldogs season in Houston. And while Kemba was by far and away the best player, and his backup Shabazz Napier would lead UConn to another championship a few years later, his teammate Jeremy Lamb would become a lottery pick in his own right. Kemba was drafted 9th overall in 2011 by the Charlotte Bobcats to what would become the worst team in NBA history by winning percentage, winning just 7 games in the lockout-shortened 2012 season. Jeremy Lamb would be drafted a year later in the lottery to the Rockets and was traded to OKC in the deal that sent James Harden to Houston, and Lamb would spend his first 3 seasons playing alongside KD and Russell Westbrook. In 2015, he joined his national championship teammate Kemba Walker as he was traded to the now Charlotte Hornets in exchange for Luke Ridnour. By then, Kemba had weathered the storm and gotten Charlotte to the playoffs, and during their first season as teammates in 2016, the Hornets would have their best season since the original Charlotte Hornets moved to New Orleans. Their roles would be similar to what they were at UConn, as Walker became one of the best point guards in the league, and Lamb would be a solid contributor in his 4 seasons in Charlotte as a starting 2 guard. Kemba would go on to become the team's all-time leading scorer, a 3-time All-Star, and All-NBA in 2019. Though the Walker-led Hornets never put out a better than average roster or made it to the second round of the playoffs, a national championship backcourt became a starting backcourt in the NBA, which doesn't happen all that often. Throughout the 2010s and early 2020s, the Kentucky basketball program was basically an NBA factory, having the most players drafted from any school during that period. It all started with the class of 2009 and Coach John Calipari's first season in Lexington, a team that boasted 8 future NBA players, including 2 All-NBA level players in John Wall and DeMarcus Cousins. Wall was a consensus #1 pick in the 2010 draft after having a freshman season for the books, as he took the nation by storm. Cousins wasn't too far behind him, as he was projected to be a top 10 pick in his own right and the first big man off the board. The two would enter the draft and go first to the Wizards and 5th to the Kings, respectively. Wall and Cousins have both had pretty similar career arcs, as at their peaks, they were 2 of the best at their respective positions. After all rookie first-team seasons, both players would progress steadily into NBA All-Stars, and before Wall's injuries in the 2017 season became a recurring theme throughout the rest of his career, he became a Wizards franchise cornerstone and one of their best players in franchise history. In his career with the Wizards, he'd averaged 19 points, 9 assists, and 4 boards a game in 9 seasons, but he'd be traded just before the 2021 season to the Rockets, in a trade that brought Russell Westbrook to DC.
All the way, left-handed dunk with style.
Cousins in Sacramento became one of the most dynamic centers in the NBA, and the one bright spot on a lowly franchise. After infamously being traded during All-Star Weekend 2017 to the host city, he'd spend some time in New Orleans and team up with Anthony Davis before an ACL injury cut his Pelicans tenure short. After a trip to the finals in 2019 with Golden State and a technical tenure with the Lakers in 2020, he'd sign a 1-year deal with the Rockets and team up with his former Wildcat teammate. By this point, both All-Stars had dealt with serious injuries and were far from their former selves, and their tenure together as Rockets only lasted half a season, as Cousins would be waived in February 2021 after 25 games with the team. He'd sign with the Clippers for the rest of the season, coincidentally teaming up with another college teammate in Patrick Patterson, and Wall's Rockets tenure would also be short-lived after playing only 40 games in Houston. But imagine a prime John Wall and DeMarcus Cousins team up in the league. If it was anything reminiscent of their time at UK, it would have definitely been one of the best duos of the era. Like mentioned before, the amount of NBA talent Kentucky basketball has churned out is unreal. With the amount of players that have come through that program, there were bound to be multiple guys who ended up as teammates at some point in the league. The 2017 Wildcats, coincidentally like the 2010 squad, would boast 8 guys who would eventually see an NBA floor, with the team's big 3 being De'Aaron Fox, Malik Monk, and Bam Adebayo. The 2 former would go top 11 in the 2017 NBA draft, Fox going 5th to Sacramento and Monk going 11th to Charlotte. Fox was positioned to take over the reins of the franchise, while Monk began his career with the bench role. Fox would progress season by season as his scoring, playmaking ability, and defense began to shape nicely, while Monk's first few years in Charlotte showed flashes but was up and down. After a year-long suspension and finishing out his rookie deal with the Hornets in 21, he'd somewhat have a resurgence with the Lakers, where he was one of the few bright spots on a disappointing team. He leveraged that season and signed with the Sacramento Kings during the 2022 offseason to bring the 2017 Wildcat duo back together once again. The two picked up immediately where they left off in Lexington, and Fox would go on to have his best season to that point and make the All-Star team, while Monk would provide a spark off the bench, including a 45-point game in one of the highest scoring NBA games ever played versus the Clippers.
Monk for the tie! Got it! Splash down!
The 2023 Kings would end the 16-year playoff drought after being one of the most surprising teams of that season. The two would return in the 2024 season to one-up their previous seasons individually, posting their best statistical campaign yet. Fox continuing his all-star level play, and Monk finishing second in the 6th Man of the Year race. The Fox and Monk duo should be around for the foreseeable future, as his past offseason, Monk re-signed with Sacramento for 4 years and $78 million. The chances to play with a college teammate in the league are already pretty low, and it's even rarer to play with a sibling. But what almost seems impossible is to play with a twin sibling, who is also your college teammate, that ends up being your teammate in the NBA. In NBA history, this has only happened 4 times, and we're going to talk about the most recent pair to do this with Brooke and Robin Lopez. At Stanford, Brook was the more highly touted twin by NBA scouts, but it was clear both were built for NBA careers. After 2 seasons with the Cardinals, they both entered the 2008 NBA draft, where Brook would go 10th to the then New Jersey Nets, and Robin would be selected 15th by the Phoenix Suns. Brook's 9-year tenure with the Nets would see him become one of the best centers in the NBA, a one-time All-Star, and the all-time leading scorer in franchise history. But as traditional centers were phasing out of the NBA, the Nets would trade him in 2017 to the Lakers. He'd take the time to adjust his game to the perimeter and become an outside threat, a decision that more than likely extended his career, and he'd leave the Lakers for the Bucks in the 2018 offseason and enter what would become a second prime.
Out deep three, Lopez 7 3-pointers for Brook Lopez.
Robin, on the other hand, outside of being every mascot's worst nightmare, wouldn't reach the same highs as his brother, but has been a solid journeyman center on 9 teams and a positive locker room addition to each of his stops. In 2019, after a decade plus into their careers, Robin would sign with Milwaukee, making he and Brook one of the handful of twins to play together in the NBA. That season, Brook was starting and Robin was playing rotational minutes, but the team was infamously upset in the 2020 bubble in the second round of the playoffs by the Miami Heat. The Bucks would redeem themselves the next year and win the 2021 title, giving Brook his first NBA championship, but Robin would sign with the Wizards the offseason prior, just missing out on the opportunity to become the first twins in NBA history to win a championship on the same team. After other stops in Orlando and Cleveland, Robin would return to the Bucks in 23, reuniting once again with his brother, but his time in Milwaukee would be cut short as he was traded at the 2024 deadline to Sacramento and subsequently waived. He hasn't been on a team since, but has been seen at his brother's games, and being a known bookworm, was seen indulging in some Patrick McGilligan. I think that college teammates who become teammates in the league is a really cool moment, especially if you're a fan of both college basketball and the NBA. It's one of those full circle things in sports that are nice to witness. But make sure to like and subscribe for more videos like this. My name is Caleb, and I'll catch you on the next one.